What does a high-fat carnivore diet look like for women, and how is that different from men?
Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. So I have patients who have thyroid disorders. I have patients who have adrenal, low cortisol, high cortisol, people who are, used to overexercise, inflammation, autoimmune issues, cholesterol being an anti-inflammatory. It will help all of that. It will balance all of that and it will help you heal and reduce inflammation. So it depends on, in the beginning when you're trying to do all these things, balance your blood sugar, not have anxiety, panic attacks, etc., you need to eat more fat.
Hey friends, welcome back to Meet the Truth. I'm so excited about today's conversation, especially for all the women watching. If you've been struggling with fatigue, anxiety, mood swings, stubborn weight, or just feeling off, this one's for you. Because what if the real problem isn't that we're eating too much, but we're eating too little fat? Today, I'm sitting down with Dr. Elizabeth Bright. She's a leading expert in women's health and hormones and an author of books like Good Fat is Good for Women. And we're diving into why women's bodies actually need fat to thrive. We'll talk about how a high-fat carnivore diet can support your hormones, thyroid, energy, stress, and what you need to know about things like iodine, cholesterol, and cortisol. So grab a coffee, get comfy, and let's dive in. Dr. Bright, it's so good to have you here. Your work on hormones and women's health is so needed in this space. I followed your work for a while, and what I love is that you help women understand their biology and not fight against it. So today I want to dig into how a high-fat carnivore diet can uniquely serve women, from hormones and energy to stress and just overall health.
Yeah, because all our hormones, the steroid hormones, which is what you're talking about here, because our stress response is made out of cholesterol. All the steroid hormones are made out of cholesterol. So you really got to eat cholesterol, which comes with animal fat, to make those hormones. It also is an anti-inflammatory. Cholesterol is, and it also obviously builds brain tissue and nerve tissue. So women are often, and men too now, are told to avoid fat, eat lean, and which really was just born from the Ansel Keys and avoid cholesterol debacle, and that's then women get really unhealthy because our stress response is made out of cholesterol and our steroid hormones. So 90% of the adrenal hormone cascade, which is the estrogen, the testosterone, the progesterone, the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, as well as the stress response, are actually synthesized in the adrenals, not in the ovaries and not even in the prostate. It's only like 10 to 15% that are made in those organs. So people tend to forget or don't want to talk about it anymore since they discover synthesized synthetic hormones, that we just do all this fine in our adrenals. And people, even people who've had hysterectomies, who, these are, you still make your hormones. Menopause, obviously, you still make the hormones you need if you're eating enough fat.
Seeing women as differently as men in especially the carnivore space and how we should approach it is important. So what does a high-fat carnivore diet look like for women, and how is that different from men?
Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. So I have patients who have thyroid disorders. I have patients who have adrenal, low cortisol, high cortisol, um, people who are, used to overexercise, um, inflammation, autoimmune issues, cholesterol being an anti-inflammatory. It will help all of that. It will balance all of that and it will help you heal and reduce inflammation. So it depends on, in the beginning when you're trying to do all these things, balance your blood sugar, not have anxiety, panic attacks, etc., you need to eat more fat. So usually my healing modality is 80-20 for women. Um, it's also very important to say that my second book, I talk about adolescence, that during puberty, women grow more tissue. So sexual characteristics require more growth in women. So they need iodine, fat, and enough thyroid hormone to be able to do that successfully so they don't have menstrual problems after that, et cetera, et cetera. So I usually recommend for men, anti-inflammatory 75-25, and for women 80-20.
It's interesting to compare the two and understand that women's biology is different and that we have different needs, and especially during different seasons and periods in our life.
The important fact that, that we're talking about right now is that finally athletes, female athletes, it's in the news, the female, the Tour de France, the women, the top racers to compete, they lose their period because they're eating, athletes, professional athletes are eating insane amounts of carbohydrates every hour, gorging on these, gorging because they have to keep going, 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 and they lose their period. So what comes in, then they lose bone density, et cetera, et cetera. So they have issues later on. And there's a whole, did a post on this on Instagram. There's a whole French site of trying to educate female athletes that if you go so far, you will uh, damage your future health. So yes, we do need more fat, and we do need to not lose our periods, over exercising, which causes you to be too lean will make you lose your period. And absolutely, that biology is different for women because of the organs and the hormones, the quantity of hormones we produce.
Let's talk cholesterol for a minute because I know that's the concern for some people, especially older women that want to try the carnivore diet. It's so misunderstood. How do you explain this to them, to your patients, when they bring this up that cholesterol should be lower because that's something that they've been taught for so long?
Well, yeah, since the 80s, really. So, I basically that it's a hypothesis, it's a lie. Ansel Keys himself did not see any kind of cholesterol levels rise in the blood when people ate fat. Malcolm McKendrick, who's a cardiologist, British cardiologist, or Scottish, um, has written several books about this. So it's, you're kind of just like you're going against the hypothesis of decided since Hippocrates that women will fall apart when they stop having their period. The medical industry furthered that by discovering, synthesizing estrogen from horse urine. Actually, they started with male, uh, you know, the urine of men in prison and concentration camps to synthesize that. So then they created a need. You want to look younger? Take this stuff. So you're kind of going up against generations of medical lies, really, both cholesterol and the synthetic hormones.
And how is cholesterol so important in our hormones, especially for our hormone health?
Well, if you're talking about the steroid, hormones are made out of two things. They're made out of peptides, which is a protein molecule, or they're made out of steroids, which is a cholesterol molecule. So if you're talking about hormones, and people usually think hormones, oh my God, they think estrogen, progesterone, those are all made out of cholesterol. The synthesis is cholesterol's at the top. That's the raw material. And then they get broken down into these different shaped molecules by thyroid hormone. So it's the thyroid that decides enough thyroid hormone makes you be able to go to stop, estrogen to testosterone, etc.
That makes a lot of sense. I did watch one of your videos recently and you talked about thyroid health. So, with thyroid health, is that something that you look at every single time with women in their health? And do you suggest things like iodine for everyone to help put all of that back in balance?
I do definitely because, I mean, hundreds of years ago, only people in the mountains, like in Tennessee. I wasn't born in Tennessee, but my family is from there, and my aunt and my grandmother and my cousins had thyroid issues. Because we know that in mountainous regions, the iodine is kind of, has dribbled down to the shores, and there's not enough iodine in the soil. Previous to that, it was Switzerland, Bolivia, you know, the goiter belts, the famous goiter belts, where people actually had goiter in their adolescence, and that's when that was discovered. But nowadays, I would say everywhere is a goiter belt because of PFAs, um, synthetic hormones, uh, all kinds of tea. The areas where they grow tea in China and India have the highest rates of congenital hypothyroidism in the world. Just those areas because of the fluoride. So in America, fluoride tooth washes, things like that. All of those things prevent the absorption of iodine, which means you won't be able to get enough from the soil. So that's why I do absolutely recommend iodine.
Is there a certain amount that you suggest that we start with, or is there kind of a generic dosage?
Usually the minimum is 2 drops of 5%. So J. Crow's actually hides the 5% link, and on Amazon you can only find 2%. because less percentage is supposed to be less scary. But the 5% is the original, was actually 15%, is the original Jean Legault recipe of 10% potassium iodide, 5% organic iodine from the crystals. So I recommend starting with that. In my book, I have instructions on self-testing and things like that. But a minimum would be, I would say, if your cells are saturated, you're okay with 2 to 4 drops of 5%. If you have fibroids, breasts, fibrocystic breasts, menstrual issues, then you may need more.
Do you think that that's something that should be tested first, or should we just order it and start taking it if that's a concern?
I think one should order and start taking. That's a very tiny amount. The thyroid by itself takes 6.6 milligrams. The breasts take 5 milligrams. 1 drop is 6.25 milligrams. Now, you can't test it. So if you go to your PCP, they're going to test radioactive iodine, and they're going to say, "Oh my God, stop eating shellfish," or things that they say. Um, the only way to test it is to do the Hakala lab test or a 24-hour uptake. You ingest 50 milligrams of iodine. You collect your urine for 24 hours, and then they measure how much bromide, fluoride, iodine comes out. But depending upon the percentage, if a lot of iodine comes out because it's excreted in the urine, you just add a little bit. But I don't really have people do those tests. I mean, that's if you really want to know, like if you have bromide toxicity, fluoride toxicity, usually just taking the iodine will get rid of those halides anyway.
Great. Thank you for that explanation. Now, let's talk about stress because I know that's something that women deal a lot with. And I know that cortisol is such a huge piece of the puzzle. And how might a high fat carnivore approach actually help calm that stress and stabilize cortisol or our response levels?
Well, we know studies have been done on athletes that a high fat diet lowers cortisol after they've been competing in high power events faster than any other diet. So they tested protein, carbohydrate, and high fat, and elite athletes' cortisol levels dropped precipitously more when they had a high fat diet. So we know that it's anti-inflammatory and it reduces stress primarily because your cortisol is made out of fat. It's made out of cholesterol. So if it's high, you're going to kind of dampen that high um, by lowering it actually. And if it's low, which is what happens after you've been too stressed for too long, the pituitary will stop making ACH to tell the adrenals to make cortisol, period, right, for a time. It will mitigate that and raise your cortisol if it's too low. And it balances your blood sugar because cortisol is also a blood sugar regulator.
There's a lot of pieces to the puzzle, it seems, to put together to finally start feeling better. And it seems like, diet alone can help with so many of those things. And if more people
Absolutely.
realize that, then so many more people would start feeling a lot better pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The diet is what you're putting in your body is primarily, and we evolved as humans to eat obviously a certain amount of protein and fat, and we did not evolve to eat carbohydrates. So we it's not anything new or weird. It's just the way it's supposed to be. And everything that's been done, you know, since they invented agriculture is the weird part.
For women who are trying to lower their carb intake and increase their fat, but they're still not feeling great yet, maybe they're doing keto or carnivore, what are some red flags or lab markers that they might want to look for to suggest that they need to adjust something else, especially around hormones or thyroid?
Okay, so obviously, I mean, if you're looking at thyroid, if you're tired and you can't make energy properly, and you're in ketosis, so you've taken out the carbs, you reduce the carbs, your body is fueled on ketones, right? That's what should happen. There are two ways to make energy: glycolysis or ketosis. So if you remove the carbs, most of them, you will be supposedly in ketosis, and that's the best fuel to burn. Now, many people who go carnivore, they don't eat enough fat. So you can't just eat a ribeye and say, I'm eating enough fat, because you're not. In order for you to transition, you're going to need extra fat. I always recommend extra fat. The other problem is that if you have any kind of blood sugar issues or cortisol issues, your liver is going to keep making sugar. It doesn't matter if you haven't had carbs in a year and you're in a stress state, your liver's going to keep making sugar and you won't get into ketosis, so you won't have the benefits. So looking at it, I usually tell people to measure their ketones an hour after a fatty meal. Um, if you were thinking about thyroid levels, if you have thyroid, low thyroid symptoms, you test TSH, free T3, free T4. If you want to test cortisol, you have to test only salivary cortisol. So no steroid hormones can be tested with blood. They all have to be tested with saliva because the blood obviously has to be attached, any hormone has to be attached to a protein to carry it around in the bloodstream. So, those are, if they already have that, then that's fine. That's enough for me. But the weird things you can find are crazy high cholesterol levels, like over 320. That's usually thyroid. Um, High liver enzymes, that's thyroid. Um, Low iron, that's thyroid. Crazy out of range B12. Again, we don't have any kind of pathology associated with that, but we know that's a thyroid symptom. So what I'm looking for in labs, that's basically what I'm looking for if you're not feeling well.
I think that's so helpful, and sometimes women expect instant results when we try something like this, and that's not always the case, and it's not always that simple. So thank you for explaining the specific things that we should be looking out for and how to address those. Let's talk dairy for a minute. I know that you love butter from what I've seen, and I think butter's awesome. Do you think things like cheese, butter, cream, included in a high-fat carnivore diet can be helpful or sometimes be more of a stumbling block?
I think it's more of a stumbling block, but again, it depends on where you're coming from. So if you have inflammation, autoimmune issues, it's going to be a stumbling block. If you have inflammation, runny nose, joint pain, it might be that you are currently hypersensitive to the milk proteins. So your immune system is looking for proteins. It wants to kill bacteria, bad bacteria, it wants to kill viruses. Um, there's no, the foods that are higher in cholesterol are going to not have as much protein. Now, butter doesn't have hardly any protein because if you've ever made ghee, you see this teeny tiny bit of protein rise to the top and you skim that. Cheese, however, has much more protein. Um, and I would say you can't get a cheese that's as high in fat as butter and milk and kefir and all this fermentation stuff. There's still going to be higher protein levels that your autoimmune system may think, oh my God, this is a bad guy. So that's where the inflammation comes from. So I usually take those out in the beginning and see it. Then people can try to reintroduce to see if they get the inflammation comes back because usually it goes away. And then even egg whites can cause this because it's all protein. So, I personally don't eat any dairy except butter.
I don't either. And sometimes I can't even tolerate butter. It'll give me acne. And so I try to stay away. I've been lactose intolerant
Yeah.
forever, but it's the same thing. It starts giving me inflammation, and I'll notice a couple things. Like I've tried raw milk, I've tried raw cheese, and I get the same issues even after a year on carnivore. So
We didn't evolve to eat that. So we're the only animals that eat another animal's milk. I mean, if you could get breast milk cheese, great, that would be okay, but you can't get it. So, it's always going to be a bit of some people can do that because their immune system isn't as sensitive, but I mean, I personally don't eat a lot of butter. I just have it in my decaf in the morning. Otherwise, I use tallow.
mm, I use tallow too. But it's comforting to know that if carnivore isn't working for you, then there just might be a few changes that you need to make to
Mhm.
start getting the results that you want. But if you could give one piece of advice for a woman who's curious about going high fat carnivore, what would that be?
Read my books. Okay. Yes, absolutely. High fat carnivore is kind of resetting your DNA template the way it's supposed to be. So all these people, doing genetic testing and all that, thyroid actually rules your genes. If you are not feeling well, you have to take stuff out. That's what's hard for people. Take stuff out to let your system go back to the way it was supposed to be before you introduced all this stuff. Or it could be stress, it could be oat milk, I don't, it could be all these substances that we as humans did not evolve to consume, which cause problems.
Mm,
And then you can reset.
yeah, I like that. The setting the foundation and then seeing what happens, especially with dairy or with your hormones or anything, just starting off with the basics, the building blocks, because
Yeah.
that's the most important. But I love that you remind women that their bodies know how to heal, and we can just be intuitive with our healing, and especially when we're finally given the right fuel. I think that's so important.
Yeah, well, healing is removing obstacles to it because the body knows what to do if you just remove the obstacles. I mean, that's what osteopathy and naturopathy are. You're removing the obstacles to the body finding its way to heal. So, absolutely. Instead of taking something that's fake from the outside that throws a wrench in the works of your body's ability to do it on its own.
Well, Dr. Bright, your insights today are pure gold. I know they're going to be helping so many women, especially with those tough questions with hormones and cortisol and even dairy, and especially for women who are feeling lost and confused with all of the constant information we're consuming on how to heal our bodies naturally. But thank you for helping us see that the healing doesn't have to be complicated, and we just have to work with our bodies and not against them.
Yes. Thank you, Lauren.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Friends, if you enjoyed this conversation today, tap the like button and hit subscribe so you don't miss future interviews that dive deep into the truth about food, health, and healing. Drop your questions or share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear your experiences. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.